And now, two guys who once survived crashing a party in the Hamptons, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 94 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, we close out 2012 and ring in 2013. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
And you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Okay, we are back from taking off a little more time than we anticipated, and to be perfectly frank, what ended up happening was we were in our Mayan zombie apocalypse bunker, and Jason McConnell lost the keys. We were stuck down there a little longer.
Couldn't believe that guy. Cannot believe that guy losing the keys.
I know, and we only pick on him because he's not on the show today.
Exactly. Good thing it didn't happen, though.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that was a really boring apocalypse, man.
A voted worst or most boring apocalypse ever.
Yeah, at least by the three of us.
Well, yeah. And a whole bunch of you on Facebook. And who voted that? Actually, I think more people liked that post than anybody's ever liked anything on our Facebook page.
They were also happy to be alive. Exactly.
And not zombies or being probed by aliens. At least not that I'm aware of. And so here we are with, and I think what we had intended to do, had we not taken off so much time, was the last show was going to be, or this show would have been on guns, but it would have been a fun show on guns. More talking about Jonathan and I's, probably more on the topic of our obsession with lever action rifles as of the last couple of years, and the way we keep trying to talk ourselves out of that purchase. But obviously that conversation has changed, and that's not, the recent events is not what this show is going to be about today. We're really going to just more give our thoughts, since this is a New Year, this show is going to come out on New Year's, is going to be what our outlook for 2013 is going to be, how that affects our survival, our general happiness and well-being, and our liberty and all that fun stuff. But we are, a good portion of the show is obviously going to be dedicated to what's going on with gun control, because that is going to be a huge topic for 2013, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's pretty sad that this has become the second probably biggest political topic going into the end of the year and into the new year. The biggest one, of course, being the fiscal cliff, but we're not going to discuss that today because I don't need to get my blood pressure completely through the roof.
Oh, no, it's on now. It is on now.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of out of it today, so I feel the need to wake you up. So we're going to talk about the fiscal cliff.
I'm awake. And now I'm choking on something. I don't know what, but I think it was that fiscal cliff words.
Yeah. Well, I guess let's start with liberty. And and what our liberty is going to look like in 2013. And I think even outside of the gun control topic, there's a lot of stuff going on that in a lot of ways I think people aren't hearing about, because everyone...
It's been a really shitty end of the year, I gotta say. I mean, no offense to anybody who doesn't like the swearing, but it's been really crappy.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of people are missing out on it because so much of the media attention, if not all of the media attention, and not that I don't understand why, but most of the media attention is on the unfortunate shooting that took place and the fiscal cliff, to wind Jonathan up some more.
It goes back to, and I keep forgetting the exact quote, but basically it's, don't let any good kind of disaster go to waste. So the tragedy, the shooting tragedy is one thing, the fiscal cliff's another, but other attacks on liberty are going on daily right now. It is so scary to even think about. I mean, a lot of you are already aware of the fact that, most of the Patriot Act, or if not all the Patriot Act, was extended.
And made worse.
Obama very gladly signed off on that. So, it's not a Republican Democrat thing. It's both sides. But just even more recently, the Congress has passed what I like to call the legal illegal wiretapping law, basically legalizing wiretapping of all electronic communication without a warrant. So law enforcement can come in, and I have actually heard actual journalists say, "Well, if you have nothing to hide, then this isn't a big deal." And that is the biggest load of bullshit I have ever heard, especially from journalists. These are the guys who were up in arms about the Patriot Act when it was the Bush Patriot Act. And the reality of it is they should have been up in arms, and they should still be up in arms, because this is a very unconstitutional thing. What makes a telephone call private but an email is not is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard of. Even the Skype call that Aaron and I are using right now to record this show is technically no longer a private communication according to this bill, and the president has already announced his intention to sign it. So it is going to be legal for law enforcement to wiretap anyone for any reason they choose, as long as they think there's a reason or feel there's a reason. So, yeah, liberty's been under a lot of attacks lately.
Well, and I want to back up for just a second, because that is, and not that I didn't at some point in my life think the same thing about, well, if you're not doing something illegal, then it doesn't affect you. And it wasn't, I think, until my maybe mid to late 20s that I really came to understand and appreciate the problem is not whether or not you're doing anything illegal. The problem is, once you make that step and you put that stuff in place, what happens after that? What happens when they start passing things, other laws that make other things illegal that weren't illegal yesterday? So maybe today it doesn't affect you, but tomorrow it gives them the ability to affect you in a lot of ways. I mean, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the gun control section of today's show. But it is quite terrifying that what you were saying, especially with journalists, and it's
and journalists being the guys who you would think would want their communications kept as secure as possible.
Yeah, I mean, they have not informants. They have sources that they want to keep private and that they want to keep secretive for a variety of reasons. But just in general, I mean, these are people that you would hope would be champions of keeping privacy in place, and it's very sad. I end up at a loss for words in a lot of ways for this, because it is just so sad. You really hope that kind of the fourth branch of government, the sort of watchdogs of government, being are the journalists, and that's just not happening by and large. So.
Yeah, and it is. The sad part is it's been given up on. So much so that it's become a commonplace now. It's like, oh, well, they've just done this, and it didn't even make the news. I mean, quite honestly, the one place I saw it was in a 30-second news clip where the journalist just added that little blurb at the end about, well, if you have nothing to hide. And at the end of the day, that was kind of the last I've heard of it on any of the, what I'll call any of the big news channels. And it doesn't matter whether it's Fox, MSNBC, CNN, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. All those big news outlets have pretty much skipped it. I haven't even seen a lot about it on Drudge. The reason I was able to keep up with it was through some of the other news media outlets that I kind of peruse on occasion. And that one I think was specifically through Reason magazine. But it's scary to think the kinds of things that they've now decided are no longer within our civil liberties.
And it is amazing, because there is a time and a place in this country's history where the novel 1984 was a really terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
And most people would have considered it completely outlandish. And there are obviously parts of that story that are not in play here. But there's one of the biggest messages and one of the biggest terrifying aspects of that was how invasive government had become. To just the point of absurdity. And I got to tell you, in a lot of ways, we're beyond where that novel took things.
Oh, yeah. And, I cannot remember his name. The producer who does a lot of the conspiracy movies starts with an O.
I don't know.
He recently came out and was talking about it being an Orwellian country now. And Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone.
Oliver Stone.
Sorry
okay.
about that. And Oliver Stone, I mean, is not always what I would call a bastion of information that's at least true.
Yeah.
And he tends to veer a little bit to the left leaning as far as American politics go.
A little bit? That was sarcasm, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But it's interesting. I mean, even he's coming out and saying, what they're doing right now is Orwellian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, truly, truly Orwellian. And his view is, Obama is a wolf in sheep's clothing is kind of his words. And I'm quoting him directly there. But he talks about it as the American sheep are just following. And it's true. It's a lot of it has to do with the information you're fed. We had a whole show on information, right, Aaron? And it was that whole idea of, you got to take what you hear with a grain of salt and do more research. But I think the majority of people, and I'm not criticizing our listeners because I think the majority of you do this. You found us, you find other news outlets. You actually took the time to research things. The rabbit hole is not exactly what I'd call mainstream, in your face, advertised on every website or anything like that. So all of you have taken some time to do research on a topic and find us. But it's amazing how many people just listen to whatever's being played on their local news and nod their heads yes and go on with their day.
Yeah, I experienced that heavily, I guess, when I was outside of my normal element. I guess the corporate headquarters, you would say, of the company that I work for, and in California, and a lot of those people. And it was almost bizarre to me. I mean, I see it here in Texas, but since I surround myself with much more conservative people in general here in Texas,
mm-hmm.
I saw the opposite effect. And I think I mentioned this a couple episodes back, that how interesting it was, because here it's all Republican talking points. And when I was out there, it was all Democratic talking points. But it was talking points without real information behind it. And I just saw just ridiculous, just regurgitating of talking points, of just generalizations without thought behind what those meant, or, and even so far as freaking out about whether or not Romney was Mormon or not, and started saying all kinds of crazy shit about the fact that he was Mormon. And I'm, I look at most religions are a little strange, even my own. And you and I share that background, and you look at a lot of it and you go, well, it's kind of wacky. But we go along with it for the most part, and it's fine. But in some instance, I was sitting at a table with people that have some very far out there beliefs, and would certainly not be considered part of any mainstream religion. And it's like, why is one worse than the other? You're just getting wound up about something because you heard some random news reporter say Mormons are bizarre and wear sheep on their head,
Well, and the amazing part, Aaron, is just how much is not even reported, right? So, we get all that stuff reported. And it is, to me, what amazes me is that we don't learn from our past, right? So not just the past of the U.S., but worldwide past. The media is easily controlled. I mean, to give you an idea, Chinese media has recently criticized the United States about not having good enough gun control. China being basically a communist fascist country. I mean, I'm using the terms a little loosely here, but they're a very military-controlled communist country where people are not entitled to own weapons of any kind, really. And the only people who have weapons are the military. And when you stand up to that country, I mean, they just arrested, I don't even remember what the number was, Aaron, but it was in the tens of thousands for spreading rumors that the world might end. So purely for speaking, even if it was ridiculous, and, Aaron and I joked about our bunker and all that stuff, but, to be put in prison because you said something about the world might end, or to speak out against the government, that's what happens when governments take arms from people. But going back to the liberty discussion just in general, we're exiting a year where the president announced publicly and proudly that he has a kill list. And he thinks long and hard before he allows a name to be put on that list. Well, I didn't hear any judicial process in that statement. Did you?
No. I'm afraid I did I doze off for a second and miss something there?
I don't think so. And he announced also, according to his own attorney general, so his administration, our government, has announced that it's perfectly acceptable to put American citizens on that list.
Well, because he thinks long and hard about it first.
As long as he thinks long and hard about it and uses his own personal judgment. And the last time I remember America having anything like that was pre-America. And it was King George. And we had a revolution against that guy. And I mean, it's just stuff like that drives me nuts. We now have drones being put in police departments in the U.S. to fly over U.S. skies. On top of that, you've got the kill lists. On top of that, you've got the illegal wiretapping. And I call it illegal wiretapping, and I'm going to continue calling it that because as far as I'm concerned, the Constitution requires a warrant for those things. And I'm sure it will go to the courts, and who knows what will happen there. But liberties are being chipped away at day in and day out. Go to the airport and feel how innocent you feel going through security. You know, in this country, we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. That doesn't mean that you might be guilty of something potentially one day, but that you are innocent until you are proven guilty by a jury of your peers. And every time you walk into the airport, tell me how innocent you feel.
I gotta say, I did not feel very innocent the last time I went through the airport.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like walking into a prison, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, you know, and here's how far it goes even. I mean, we had to make a trip to New Orleans recently, and it's a 6-hour drive from here. Or it's about, what is it? It's like an hour plane ride, if that, maybe it's a 45-minute plane ride.
Yeah, it's not a long plane ride at all.
No. And it's actually, it would have been cheaper for us to fly than drive, given gas prices and everything, all things in consideration. I opted to drive because I was just like, it's just not worth it. I don't want to be treated like a criminal in a system where that is not, especially considering that is not an effective measure. When we have, certainly we have other ways of doing things where other, you know, we can take Israel. And actually Israel will get brought up several times in this conversation of, you know, they've already figured it out and it works really well. And they have a lot more problems with terrorists than we do.
Right. And you know what? There's going to be a lot of people who respond, and maybe not on this show, but I've seen a lot of response that the Israelis actually do have a lot of gun control. And it's true. The Israelis do have a lot of gun control, but they also issue carry permits to a lot of people. And it is a different country, and they don't have in their constitution the right to bear arms. And believe it or not, they have found that the majority of their violent crimes aren't committed by guns at all. The majority of violent crimes in Israel are committed by suicide bombers and other means. So the reality is it's kind of hard to use that one. But I agree with you, Aaron, that the school shooting thing is a prime example of, well, when you arm teachers, you're much less likely. By the way, just very quickly, I do want to point out that some new news recently came to light. And one of the interesting things was apparently it was round number 74 for this recent shooter. And I'm not going to, by the way, we're not going to use his name because there is no point in saying his name. It's not about making celebrities out of people here. So in that recent shooting, round number 74 is when his AR actually jammed. There was a stovepipe. For those of you who have ARs, you know that stovepipe can be tough to clear on an AR without ejecting a magazine. It can take time, and if you're not trained, stovepipes in general can be tough to deal with. So at that point, he threw the gun, went for a pistol. And by the way, the first time he saw a responder with a gun, the very first responder with a gun that he saw is when he shot himself.
Well, we saw that in the mall shooting, too, when a citizen, a concealed carry holder, pointed his gun at the mall shooter. That is the point at which the mall shooter stopped and took his own life. Oh, yeah,
exactly. And that's kind of why, you know, my attack is always these gun-free zones are ridiculous. Basically, it's like telling the wolf that this is the farmer-free zone. Please feel free to attack the cattle here.
Mm-hmm.
Or the coyote. You know, here's where we keep the animals we don't protect. Just feel free to cull that part of the herd.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what happens. And as soon as these guys, these cowards who walk into places with guns and with the intent to do harm on innocent people, as soon as those cowards see someone who's ready to stand up to them with a firearm, they take their own lives. And it's pretty consistent throughout these things. You know, these aren't the bravest people in the world.
No, these are people with real issues, and yep. And I mean, we get into all the different aspects of that in just a bit. But I do.
Sorry, I every now and then, you know, I'm just getting a little hyped up on it.
Jumping ahead, man, jumping ahead. But I do want to point out, and this is probably pointless, but it certainly is getting as long as we're talking about things that work us up. You and I were both recently worked up about, and this really doesn't have anything to do with 2013, but it does have I don't know, it speaks to our culture in some ways. Pierce Morgan.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what a joke that guy is. But I do want to point out, for those that aren't aware, there was a petition on whitehouse.gov to deport Pierce Morgan. And I will say that while in practice I don't think it would actually be an appropriate response, I did sign the petition to have him deported. But apparently, nobody likes Pierce Morgan, as even the British created a whitehouse.gov petition that they weren't supposed to, and they've been petitioning for us to keep him.
Yes, yeah. Well, they don't want him back. It took them, what was the quote? 40 years to get rid of him. Well, send him back.
I wanted to work up to that because it was actually, and it was somebody that you and I both really like, Jeremy Clarkson from, and now I've just went blank, the name of that show, Top Gear.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I don't really have a thing for cars, but I love the show just because it's hysterical, and they're really bright guys. But I thought it was great that Jeremy Clarkson's tweet was, Americans, it took us 40 years to get rid of Pierce Morgan. Please don't send him back.
Yeah, I think that's great. But you know what Pierce Morgan is to me? He is a symbol of all of that quote-unquote journalism in America today.
Yeah.
So he's not a journalist by any stretch of the imagination. You know, he is an inflammatory talk show host, and that's really his role. So honestly, like you said, I don't believe the appropriate response is to deport the guy. I'm all about free speech. He can say whatever he wants. I don't like him. And honestly, when I look at the other side of the equation, Bill O'Reilly with his so-called quote-unquote rational gun control discussion, he's another guy I don't like. I'm ready to deport him as well.
I would agree with that. And I think I've even stated on the show a few times that I cannot stand Bill O'Reilly. I think it's a shame. I think he is obviously a very intelligent guy who gets in front of a camera and says some really stupid shit that in a lot of ways is completely counter to what he says his principles are.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then and I'll even take it a step further. Even the organizations, and since we are kind of framing this within the gun debate and discussion, even organizations like the NRA, which are supposed to have rational arguments for why not to have gun control, rather than actually approaching that for political reasons, and I kind of get why they did this. They didn't want to get attacked immediately. The NRA came out with this armed schools concept, the security guard at every school concept, armed guards and arming teachers and all of that. And while I am all in favor of arming teachers, I'm not necessarily all in favor of armed guards at schools beyond arming teachers because of tax dollars and all that other stuff. But beyond that, when you look at the NRA's response, it has been very little of what I would call a rational gun control debate. Their response is just to propose another ludicrous plan, which we know that most Americans won't go for, the concept of arming more people in schools. You know, rather than actually approach the debate properly and say, look, gun control doesn't work. And I mean, one thing I'm going to throw this out, and I know we're going to go back and forth, Aaron, and I know you kind of wanted to have more of a structure, but I'm going to jump in with this anyway.
No, that's fine.
One of the things is, you know, I've heard this question, well, you know, we need an assault weapons ban. Well, my response to that, well, assault weapons bans don't work. And I recently had this discussion with somebody, and somebody said, well, how do you know? How do you know that an assault weapons ban wouldn't have stopped this? And quite simply, and I'm stealing a little bit of this from Reason, but I also had this discussion with somebody in real life. The reason you know it didn't work is it wouldn't work. It didn't work. So Connecticut, which is where this happened, has an assault weapons ban. They still have, it's pretty much modeled after the 1990s assault weapons ban that we had nationally. It didn't stop this guy from getting the gun. Guns. It didn't stop him from going on a mass rampage. We know that these things don't work. All it does is puts more of a problem for those of us listening to the show, all of us legally holding, I guess, whatever you'd call it, citizens. But it doesn't stop these things. And, you know, the NRA, rather than having the rational debate, has taken a stance pretty similar to either Pierce Morgan or Bill O'Reilly or these other guys. They've taken a very emotional response. And I kind of expect better from our lobbying, or maybe I shouldn't. But I do expect better from someone out there. I don't know who it is yet, but I expect better.
I will interject that on one topic I actually did like what they proposed, but I felt it was like, and I'm going to have, I guess I'm going to go ahead and jump into this point, which was that it was another, to me, the whole discussion has become a one-trick pony from everyone involved in the conversation. You've got people that are either, all they're talking about is more guns, which I'm actually in favor of, or you have people that are talking about no guns at all, or you have people that only want to talk about mental illness. But I've yet to come across anybody that is actually talking about this from a more holistic, let's look at the big picture, what were all the issues in play here, and how can we address all of these things? No, what you have instead are people that had a pet project or some pet passion, and that's all they're focusing on. And I don't think there is no one solution to this. And now what I didn't like about the NRA's proposal, actually there were two parts that I didn't like. What I didn't like was that is also a one-trick pony from the standpoint of it is a single issue. Mm-hmm. These mass shootings don't just happen in schools. They happen in movie theaters, as we saw. They happen in shopping malls, as we saw. They happen, going back to the sheep conversation, they happen anywhere where you have a large gathering of people that are mostly unarmed and places that are unguarded. That's where these things take place. So the NRA's was, and this is the emotional aspect of it, that's all what they were proposing, focuses on, is the exciting, and not in a positive way, emotional tragedy that took place. It doesn't actually address the real underlying issue of what happened.
Well, and to be fair, I just want to throw this out there. Mass shootings as a whole are not commonplace. Our media makes them sound like they happen all the time, and we recently have had, I guess relatively recently, we've had 2 mass killings. But the reality of it is these things are not commonplace. They're not becoming more common. They're actually, we're going to post a link to an article that's really good in the show notes. But basically, it'll show you that mass killings in this country peaked in 1929. They then saw a decline over a period of time. They saw an increase between 1960 and the 1990s. But in the 2000s, including recently, they've actually been on a decline, which is interesting. I mean, it's one of those things where if you listen to the talking heads, you would never have guessed that.
No, and that's actually, and I just thought of it. It's not something in the show notes, so this is going to be a little fuzzy. But there's an author. He's a doctor. What's his name? I think it's Pinker. I'll put it in the show notes. But he is a researcher who has been blasted for saying that actually violence as a whole and as a society, we are actually becoming much less violent than historically. And people keep blasting him about it, and yet he's the one with the research and goes, no, look, you can actually see the numbers. This is a declining problem. That's not to say that we shouldn't look at this and say, how do we prevent something like this from happening? But to focus on it as if it is becoming this growing problem, it would be faulty. And I think that really speaks to what you were saying about it. Yeah. But the other part I really didn't like about the NRA, and I think we're going to focus on the NRA for a few minutes because both you and I do support financially the NRA.
Yes, they are a good lobby for the agenda that I personally have. Yeah. And they've done a decent job in doing that. I just don't think they always vocalize it very well.
No, they really don't. And I think, and speaking to part of that, not vocalizing it well, was when LaPierre trailed off towards the end of his speech, talking about the violence of video games and television and the media. And it's not that he's incorrect in what he was saying, which I didn't agree with up until a few years ago, but there is a book, not on killing, it's the guy's other book, and this was another thing that I didn't put in the show notes, and I'll put a link to today. There's a section on, actually, I am going to stop the recording for a second and look for this. Okay, it is On Killing is the name of the book that in particular speaks to this by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who is a really interesting writer, and I do recommend his books. He has, in particular, in the book On Killing, he has a whole section on the effects of violence in television and violence in video games, and he obviously speaks to the topic much more eloquently than I'm going to do here in quick passing. But there is a real effect, And being somebody that is in the marketing field and understands persuasion and understands these things, I do have a very fundamental understanding of how that really is an issue. But I felt in them talking about it in that context, it was a distraction and unnecessary. And I think had it been a platform of the NRA for a long time to come up with a solution for how do we find a solution for that this is actually a societal issue without it interrupting people's rights and liberty. If it had been a long-standing platform that they were vocal about, I would have been it would have made sense to hear in his speech. But given that it is not a major part of their platform and it's not something they talk about often or often enough or loud enough, then it seemed very much like a distraction.
Yeah, I think that's part of what the intent was to some extent, though. I think it's kind of distract from the main issue here, which is they kind of want to almost downplay the fact that you've got some pretty aggressive gun control bills being talked about right now.
Yeah.
The media keeps talking about common sense gun control. And to be honest with you, I think that's, again, we can talk about this as the media trying to sway public opinion and whatever. I'm not sure we want to even have that debate during the show. And you and I are on the same side of this, but the media has an agenda. Okay. And when I say the media, I mean the big media channels that we all see on our TVs regularly. And this concept of common sense gun control isn't common sense at all. I mean, if it was common sense, then you'd have mass amounts of Americans going, oh, yes, let's give up our guns. And the reality of it is in no poll is that true. USA Today actually tried to make it look like Americans were in favor of gun control by changing the size of bars on a bar graph. It was very interesting. I don't have it. And if I do find it, I will make sure it ends up in the show notes or in some later posting. They were basically trying to show you that the number 43% was bigger than 51%. It was a really strange way of depicting some numbers. But the reality of it is 51% of Americans currently, even based on a USA Today poll, which is a very left-leaning poll, that gun control should not be strengthened in any way. There should be nothing done with gun control in addition to what's already being done. Quite the contrary, a lot of the people agreed that what really just needs to happen is current laws need to be enforced properly rather than anything else. So it's just interesting to see how the media takes these spins and calls it common sense. They try to show you bar graphs, and then rather than actually do real comparisons, they kind of do things not to scale. But when you really start talking about common sense, looking at the research is where the common sense is. And there is no research, none that I have seen at all. And if somebody has real research by a real research institution that shows otherwise, you're welcome to send it to me, that shows that more guns equals more violent crime. And when you send that research, make sure they've stripped out suicides. Suicides, while violent, is a different type of thing. And somebody who's intent on killing themselves is probably going to find a way, whether it's a gun, a pill, a knife, or something else.
Well, and that speaks to these mass killings, as we've seen during Columbine, and as we've seen in, I think, the big mass killing that happened in the 1920s. These assault weapons were not the issue in these, and especially the one in the 1920s that was actually completely done with explosives,
dynamite.
Yeah, and I know when I was a small lad, I went to an elementary school, and that was affected by one of those. It didn't happen while I was there. I think it happened. It happened in the very late 60s, maybe very early 70s, where a distraught father walked onto the playground with a suitcase bomb, not of the nuclear variety, obviously, but walked onto a playground with a suitcase full of explosives and blew himself and the school principal, I believe, and a whole bunch of children up. No guns were involved in that, which is why I go back to we need to address what is the root issue here and how do we really attack this root issue, because it is not just guns. And that moves on, I think, to another point, which is a little out of order from the way I wanted to talk about things, but that moves on to something stupid I was reading on a website called the Good Man Project, which in general is a pretty interesting and very insightful online magazine addressing kind of men's issues and things. But they started bringing in all kinds of writers, actually in general, that their writing has started to take a very strange slant, not just with guns, but in general. But this one in particular was obviously about guns, and they had a female writer come on, and she talked about that she was from West Texas and grew up with shotguns. And so you start off thinking that this article is going to be very pro-gun, and in one way it was, and another way it wasn't, and that'll make sense when I explain it, I guess, which is that she talked about growing up as a competitive shotgun shooter, and that her dad was a big second rights proponent, and then she goes on to talk about that her husband was super anti-gun and wouldn't have guns in the house. Well, and it's a very kind of convoluted article, and you think it's going to be in favor of guns, and that you think that she's going to take the article to the standpoint of how she showed her husband it was okay, and in part she did. But really where she landed on was at some point, I think it was like her 16th birthday or something, her dad gave her a pistol. I think it was a Jericho, which is also referred to as a baby eagle. Which is owned by the same company that makes the Desert Eagle, and it bears a physical resemblance to the Desert Eagle, but I don't think it functions in the same manner. But she went on to talk about how it was evil, and it felt evil, and it looked evil, and it had to have been made for evil. And I know this is actually a conversation you and I have had many times over the years, Jonathan, that our aggravation with when people talk about not just guns, but anything being evil, it's a person is evil. A person is not well. It is an inanimate object that you are now anthropomorphizing, that you are now imbuing with human qualities. It's an inanimate object. If it lays there untouched, it will not go off on its own. I think that guy that has like a 24-hour and has for years video feed on a website of an AR sitting in a corner, it's never gone off.
Right.
On its own. And a few of you know what I'm talking about, and the rest of you are wondering. But, I mean, you've gotten the gist now, and the point being that it is an inanimate object without human hands. It is either good or bad. Now, there are some things, like a lot of people in the last few years that are pro-gun have tried to take guns in a weird place and say, well, they're tools, they're not weapons, we don't talk about them as weapons. And I think that is a foolish conversation. Because guns are weapons. They are tools, but as a subset of tools, they are weapons, and they are built and intended to destroy something. But that doesn't mean that they are intended to destroy an innocent human being.
I think that's the important distinction here, and I would only differ with you in one way, and I would say guns are intended to kill, not necessarily destroy, and there is nothing wrong with that. So there are, and for those of you who are currently writing emails as we speak, that no, guns are not always intended to kill. Some are competition, blah, blah, blah. That is true. There are competition guns out there that are intended to shoot at paper. But the original intent of whatever firearm that's based on was intended to kill, whether it be an animal, whether it be, and when I say, I'm going to differentiate for the purpose of this, an animal or a person, that you can argue that all day long. But guns are intended to kill. And my view of it is there's nothing wrong with that. That is, it's not that you want to use it to kill. Okay, but when somebody comes into your home or comes onto your property or threatens the life of your family or your children or your loved ones, it is your right to defend them. And I don't mean your right because of the Constitution. I don't mean your right because some politician decided it so. I mean, as a living, breathing animal.
You mean an inalienable right?
An alienable right, exactly. It is your right to protect yourself, your family, your loved ones. And that's, I think, the most important aspect of all this that people lose sight of. And so I just saw an interesting article this morning. Cat Williams, for those of you who don't know, he's not what I would call an upstanding citizen, but he's a comedian. And he has recently been to jail, so he's not the best upstanding model. But his statement was very true. Somebody asked him what he thought about gun control and how he couldn't believe in it because it was designed to protect the children. And his response was, well, how do you protect the children without the guns? And I thought that was fantastic.
Well, you know, and here's a really crazy one, and I actually have not had time to read the statement in its entirety. And here's a name you probably never heard on this show before, but Michael Moore had at least the clip I read was like, wait, what? Who said that?
Yeah.
And it was, and I'm not really trying to quote it here, but the essence was, I'm going to try to get it as close to I can, but the essence was people with guns don't stop what they're doing until other people with guns show up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was the essence of what he was saying. And I think it was actually pretty close to what he said. And I was shocked by it. I think Michael Moore is delusional. I think he's a whack job, but I don't think he's an idiot. So, anyway, but
even those people have moments of glimmers. And so Dianne Feinstein, who's the one who claims that she's been writing this assault weapons ban bill, which turned out to be more than an assault weapons ban, and we'll get into a little bit more of that in a second. But Dianne Feinstein, by the way, carries a gun. She is permitted in the state of California. She carries a gun for personal defense, and yet she doesn't necessarily think you should be allowed to carry one. The President of the United States, while he does not carry a gun, at any given time is surrounded by men with guns. And when I say surrounded, in one count that I saw of an aerial of a place where the president was, within 15 feet of him, there were 48 armed men. So he thinks it's good enough for him. Dianne Feinstein has decided it's good enough for her. Harry Reid is a carrier of a gun, and he is permitted, and he carries concealed and unconcealed and whatever he can in Nevada, where he comes from. Harry Reid carries a gun. Yet again, he doesn't necessarily feel you should be allowed to have one. So what we're creating is this political class of elitists who believe it's okay for them to be protected and have their families safe, but it's not okay for the rest of us. And what is more terrifying to a criminal coming into your door? You with a hunting rifle in one round, or you with an AR or an Armalite rifle or an American rifle, whatever your term you like to use for it is, and knowing that you've got 30 rounds against the 1 to 3 people who might be coming into your house. In a recent FBI statistic, they found that most home invasions are not done by a single offender. They are done by 3. Well, if 3 people are coming into my house, I want to have as many bullets in my gun as I can have. If that's 30, it's 30. If it's 50, it's 50. And if I could fit 100 in there, I would.
Well, actually, you can, but those damn things are really expensive.
That's a problem. And plus, they're heavy.
That is heavy, yeah. I was actually looking at one. There was one for my FAL, and I think it was like $600 for the 100-round drum magazine. And I thought it was funny, and if I had an extra $600 laying around burning a hole in my pocket, well, I still wouldn't buy it. I'd probably give it to charity. But it was interesting, and yeah.
And even the Surefire 50-rounders start getting very heavy very quickly. Yeah. I mean, so 30 rounds seems to be a comfortable weight on the AR. I can see why people have gravitated towards it. It's actually a good carry maneuverability amount. But even my pistol, doesn't conform to a 10-round capacity. And the reality of it is I'm glad. If 3 people came into my home, we all know what happens in stressful situations, and you want to make sure that you can end a situation. And a determined intruder could get shot and still come at you. So it's all about defense, and it's not necessarily about proactively or actively, maybe that's the word, actively taking life. It's about defense, and I should have as much of a fighting chance as any criminal.
And quite frankly, I really just don't see the real logic. All I see is fear when anytime anybody writes about how many bullets something has, all I see is fear. Oh, they could squeeze off 60 rounds in 45 seconds. No, probably not. Not without a fair amount of practice, and also probably not accurately. But quite frankly, I can do that with a 10-round magazine about as easily as I could with a 30-round magazine. So,
yeah. And it goes to something you said earlier too, which is, it's impossible to have an intelligent conversation with someone that doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think you're right there. I mean, the idea that most of these people who make comments like that don't know enough about it. And Bloomberg is a great example.
Oh my God. He is a bastion of stupid shit.
Came out in an article, or I guess it was an interview, saying that, he really felt like we needed to finally get rid of, and I'm going to quote him on this, we need to get rid of those automatic weapons where you pull the trigger and it just goes bam, 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 bam. He said that. And the reporter, actually, I don't know who she was or anything, it was a female reporter, corrected him and said, well, we're talking about semi-automatic weapons here. They don't do that. You have to pull the trigger for each shot, just like you do a hunting rifle. And his response was, a very ignorant, obviously he didn't care about the differentiation. He said, oh, it doesn't matter. People don't need them.
Oh, but he also did say that he is the biggest supporter of the Second Amendment that there has ever been.
Well, and of course he is. He's another one of those guys who doesn't believe in your right or my right to have arms, and yet he's always surrounded by an entourage of armed men.
Oh, because he's important.
Right. And that's, again, it's that elitist view. Bloomberg is the ultimate elitist, of course. Not only does he want to ban so-called quote-unquote high-capacity magazines and anything that he labels an assault rifle, he also wants to stop you from drinking sugary drinks because, you might get jittery when you're holding that assault rifle. I mean, it gets to the point where it really is absolutely ridiculous. Speaking of liberty, if I can't eat what I want, what can I do?
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah. All right, we got to get off Bloomberg because otherwise, I'll spend another hour just talking about what a colossal dumbass, overreaching elitist. Just, I'm going to say it, bastard that guy is. And I wouldn't say that if that was his views and he was not in a position to inflict his views on other people. If he wanted to stand on the street corner and shout it from the top of his beliefs from the top of his lungs, fine. But at this point, he's legislating other people's. But what? Hey, New York,
he's sworn to uphold the Constitution like most other politicians, and he doesn't. I mean, Michael Moore, however much I find most of what he says distasteful, he has a right to say it.
Mm-hmm.
I really do find that politicians need to curb their right to, and it needs to be a logical discussion that they have within their own heads. Of curbing their right to free speech with the protection of the Constitution. And a lot of these guys have forgotten that concept. One thing I mentioned earlier was you and I were talking before the show, and it was about what this assault weapons ban that the Senate is about to propose actually consisted of. And I think there's a lot of confusion around that.
I actually want to get into something else real quick before we do
go
that,
for it.
because this is actually going to be a short section before we go on to that, which is as far as touching back on the media for a second. And whoever that journalist was wonderful, and that really bothers me that I do not see that very much in the media. As far as I was even watching something with Fox the other day, and it was a journalist who I actually normally find very intelligent and really respect, but what I see from journalists from on both sides of the issue is no one doing any kind of homework beforehand, and she basically let the guests say all kinds of really off the wall, completely infactual, inaccurate things, and didn't challenging on him. And the problem with it is now it's been said, it has not been countered, it has not been challenged, and there are people sitting in the audience that are like, oh, okay, nobody challenged it, so that must be fact. And he completely said the opposite of what the report that he was quoting said. And she just let him do it. And it was not, I mean, this was something that she should have seen coming, a conversation that actually she brought up. And she should have known what that report said, or at least what the final result of that report was. It really blew my mind. But this actually was what that comment that you were referring to earlier, as far as it's impossible to have an intelligent conversation with someone that doesn't know what they're talking about. And that's what I see a lot happening in the media and just in general. I mean, just talking to people in general on both sides of the discussion, but more so in the people that are against guns altogether. I think a real problem I have, and I think I've seen people talking about, well, we shouldn't get hung up in talking about whether it's a clip or a magazine or this or that. And actually, I think, and at first I would have agreed with that, but in think about it, and working with a lot of journalists, I've thought long and hard about that, and I've realized why that actually is a real danger. Because if you have a journalist using the wrong nomenclature, the wrong terminology, referring to things in the wrong way, you end up with the Bloombergs of the world that get to say whatever they want and have obviously not done the research. And that's really, I can't tell you how many articles I've skimmed through recently that keep using the word clip. And I know, especially within our community, clip versus magazine is kind of like a big thing. And you basically want to all slap each other on the back of the head when you hear somebody say it. But it is actually very important for a journalist. If they're getting that wrong, it just shows that they have not done the research on what they're talking about. Because to miss
there's
something,
a psychological component too.
Oh, yeah.
And there's clearly an agenda.
Yeah.
Clip just sounds mean and nasty. I mean, you might have. We could call it a freedom box.
I think you're onto something there. Don't take my freedom box.
Exactly. I need my 30-round freedom box and my 50-round freedom box and my 100-round freedom drum.
It started here. Jonathan's freedom box. Well, maybe you shouldn't call it Jonathan because that sounds weird, but...
Yeah, exactly. I don't personally want to talk about my freedom box, but...
We don't want to talk about your freedom box either, but we can just call it, people should start calling him freedom box, which is actually probably as silly as calling them freedom fries, but...
Oh, yeah, it's terribly silly, but it's exactly what they're doing by calling it a clip, right? A clip is a military thing. It's a holder of destructive tools. It has all these connotations in people's heads. It's used in bad Rambo movies.
All right. So, but going back to what I think that we pointed out the why people should be careful when they're watching the media, and I think to Navy Jim, one of the most active members of the forum and one of the more senior members of the forum, pointed out one day that he had a long explanation of, in part, why the media does what the media does. And it's, if you don't like it, write into the media and tell them they were inaccurate. And enough people do it, it actually will change it. And I'm really grossly oversimplifying what Navy Jim said. But that is, in essence, you have to tell them, hey, you guys are wrong. I'm really kind of irritated with the fact that nobody corrected this. And, enough people do it, they then have to start changing the ways because they are a business. And businesses do listen to their customers. So in most instances, but going on to what you were saying, as far as the liberties of, and then after we get through this, then we'll move on to our financial outlook for 2013 and really wind Jonathan up and me too, because actually there's a piece of this that hugely affects my life and something my family's been working on for 60 years. So, but go on, Jonathan, with what's going on with gun control, because even some of this was news to me because I really haven't had time to really look into it lately.
Well, so I'm going to end the report thing, though, just real quickly. The whole idea of reporters doing things and not saying accurate things. And it goes back to something I've mentioned it before. My dad used to say it all the time, but it's figures don't lie, but liars can figure. And, one of the things we hear a lot is America has the highest violent crime rates in the world. Well, actually, that's not really true. The problem with American statistics is we include, again, going back to that whole thing about suicides and all that. If you actually compare apples to apples, for instance, Great Britain and Australia have higher violent crime rates than we do. 7 years ago, in fact, Great Britain was faced with a really terrible problem of kitchen knife killings. And one of the things they actually had proposed to them by the British Medical Association was that kitchen knives, chef's knives, over 8 inches be banned. You can't make this stuff up. Now, that was 7 years ago, and they haven't done that. But they did recently pass a rule for pubs, and certain pubs, for instance, can't have glass pint glasses anymore because they found that people were breaking the glass pint glasses and using those as weapons. Now they have to use plastic pint glasses in some types of pubs. So it's all kinds of craziness like that. But now going back to the meat of the issue. Some of the things that this assault weapons ban says are kind of scary. A lot of people looked at it and said, well, it's not too bad, or, I guess I could deal with a 10-round. I've got my AR already, so if they ban them, big deal. They'll grandfather mine.
Well, I'll admit to it. That was actually some of the things. There's more context to what it was, but actually, I was the one that said that.
I wasn't going to call you out. But I mean, I've actually heard it from more than just you. I've heard that a lot. But here's one of the kickers. According to the current bill that Dianne Feinstein is going to introduce next week to the Senate, it isn't just going to ban, quote unquote, assault weapons. What it's going to do is it's going to be a 1-item test. So, for instance, it used to be a 3-item test, meaning that you had to meet 3 criteria to be considered an assault weapon. For instance, I think it was a forward grip, a pistol grip, and a bayonet mount, or a adjustable stock, a pistol grip, and I don't remember what the last thing was, but basically there were 3 criteria that you had to meet. Now she's taking it to a 1 criteria thing. Meaning if you meet any one of this huge list of criteria, it is an assault weapon. They've also specifically named about 1,000 guns by name that are now assault weapons under that, if this bill passes. But what's scary about that is it takes all those guns, which is all the ARs in the country and a lot of other guns as well, Steyr AUGs, FALs, the whole bit. And it classifies them as assault weapons, and it's going to take them and put them under the National Firearms Act. We've talked about the National Firearms Act before, but not in detail.
Actually, no, we did. It was a very old show where we brought on Robert, and he explained the NFA.
Well, since it was old enough, I'll kind of give you a couple of details. If you own an AR-15 today and this bill passed, you would have to register it with the government, get your fingerprints taken, or create a trust, one or the other. Either way, you'd then have to wait for a tax stamp, which is going to cost you $200 per AR or per weapon that qualifies as this. And by the way, this also qualifies handguns with detachable magazines, which, as far as I know, is pretty much every semi-automatic handgun has a detachable magazine. It'll force a $200 tax stamp on all of those things. And then on top of that, it makes the transfer of those items very, very difficult, as Aaron and I both know. There's not a big used suppressor market out there. And there's a reason for that. Transfer is very difficult. It costs everybody a lot of money in the process to do. So there's a lot of things in this bill that are kind of scary. Like I said, it bans a lot of handguns, shotguns, rifles, weapons that you would think would not be covered under an assault weapons ban are very clearly targeted here. There's a few places to go online to find more details about it. Reason has an article. Drudge has an article. We'll try to there's a link with a video in it that Aaron and I will review, and if it looks logical and good, we'll include that in the show notes. But this is a pretty heavy-duty bill. This isn't what I would call quote-unquote common sense gun control. It's not just a background check and closing the so-called gun show loopholes or anything like that. This is a pretty comprehensive restriction on rights.
Yeah, it is. I just looked it up while you were talking. It was episode 8. For those interested, actually goes into. I think it was. It was a full hour-long show that really goes into pretty good detail about NFA weapons. But NFA weapons are real pain because it wasn't just the government. You've got to register with the ATF, and I think one of the things we were talking about before the show is a few months back we were excited when. But for people going forward, I know the waits with trying to get tax stamps and stuff for suppressors was a real long wait. I think it was like 9 months, maybe even more.
6 to 9 or something like that.
But they recently announced they were going to double the staff. Well, and this was an interesting thing in the pre-show discussion you and I were having, which is that would mean that I think you said there were like 45 million ARs. Yeah,
it might be much more than that. I think that's a lowball statistic that's from like 2007.
Okay.
So it may be double that now.
Yeah. Well, that is so we'll go with that number just for ease of use. So that's 45 million people overnight. That's just one kind of gun put into this that are now having to who apply for their NFA tax stamps through a government agency that is already overburdened and that was taking 9 months to do something that we were just talking about. What was it, like about 1 million suppressors a year?
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that's the real number. I just can't imagine it's much higher than that. I mean, if it is, maybe it's even twice that. Even if it was 10 million, suppressors a year, which would be a crazy big number. Just ARs. So forget all the other stuff out there. It's 4.5 times that. I mean, and it would all have to happen at once because we'd all have to go get our weapons registered immediately. It's a huge number.
What it really does is it's a way of creating a retroactive law without being a retroactive law, because it starts creating, basically you're creating a system where it's too difficult to own the weapon. It's too difficult to continue using the weapon, and it gets people to start just getting rid of their guns. Or it also creates a system where you can't inherit the gun and stuff like that, or items. So it's really pretty.
And it's
nasty.
$9 billion in additional tax revenue. The U.S. government.
Yeah, they have a lot of magic numbers where they're going to do something that is incredibly restrictive, and somehow that's going to make them a lot more money, rather than people just saying, you know what? Either I'm just going to be in breach of the law for the next 10 years while it takes for all this stuff to go away again, or I'm just going to get rid of it. So, anytime this administration talks, I mean, really any administration, because they're all, what are they? They're politicians. They're all a bunch of liars. But anytime you have these just goofy predictions on taxes because they're going to do something new and exciting that really restricts your life. Somehow they think magically that's going to make them more money. But that's what you have when you have a whole bunch of people affecting an economy that have never owned a business in their life, and yet somehow they're extremely wealthy as public servants. Always amazing. And actually, that takes us into financial outlook for 2013, and that was about as smooth a transition as I could do to get us off our gun control rant.
I'm just going to throw out, we're probably going to try to keep this. I think we'll keep this section pretty short, and we'll probably save our longer show for once Congress has figured out what next year's actually going to look like, which may be in a few weeks. At least that's my suggestion, Aaron. You're welcome to take it or leave it. But
I'm going to say all kinds of banana things.
Exactly. You can say crazy stuff.
I'm going to say crazy stuff because at this point, I mean, sadly enough, it could come true. But I don't think 2013 is going to be as bad as some people think, and it's not going to be as good as some other people think, which is easy to say because, well, that's always the case, which is kind of another thing that, you know, I've heard a lot of people using this in the last 2 years, this phrase, which is every boom is preceded by a bust. And honestly, all I have to say to that is, well, no kidding, because it's a cycle. So to me, that's a really stupid statement. And I think what we see now is just complete stagnation of an economy that just can't seem to get off its butt and really do anything. And you know, there's a lot of organizations and there's a lot of political bodies that are to blame for that. And I think moving forward, what we're going to see for 2013 is really just more of the same. I think the tax issue is going to be kind of gross coming up. I think it's not going to be as bad as people think. I think the current White House administration is, I'm going to go along with that. You know, they are in a beautiful position strategically in that no matter what they do, whether the White House allows us to go over the supposed fiscal cliff or not, the Republicans are going to take a bath, which honestly, I can't stand the Republicans either. And we voiced that we're libertarians quite a bit, but no matter what the Republicans do, they're going to take a bath in this and they're going to take the heat for it. I was just talking to a group of friends that are all very heavily into the real estate market. And we were talking about what's going to happen with the housing market and all this. And really all of them said both markets, both commercial and residential real estate, are actually poised to really take off again, but it's not going to happen for at least another 2 to 3 years because everybody is terrified about and this is what they're hearing from everyone and from every level of purchasing power, is that everybody's terrified about what's going to happen, especially with taxes, but also just financially. There's so much uncertainty, but I really think I don't think that uncertainty is more of an emotional reaction because I really just keep repeating myself, but I think it's just going to be more of the same. What your opinion is, Jonathan?
Well, I think the problem is there is absolute uncertainty. So to give you just an example, and it affects your business too, but it may be on a slightly smaller scale, but a big bit right now, if you were a large enterprise, right, you've got, let's say, even a small enterprise, 1,000 employees. Right now, today, you are already issuing their checks that come out you've already issued the checks that come out for January 1st. Well, how much did you take out? How much withholding did you do? Your accountants are going crazy trying to figure out withholdings. They're basing it on numbers that haven't even been published yet. So they're making estimates. They're mostly doing worst case. So most Americans for their January 1st paychecks will be seeing a pretty significant reduction compared to what your, let's say, December 15th paycheck looked like. And I mean significant. It's not going to be small. You're going to see, even if you make, to throw a number out there, I think if you make $50,000 a year, you're going to see probably about $100 to $150 a month less in your paycheck. And to me, that's significant to a lot of people. That's a bill right there that you're no longer going to have the money to pay potentially. So yeah, and I think the other problem with uncertainty is how do I as a company planner do any kind of financial planning without knowing what my payroll hit's going to look like, what my corporate taxes are going to look like. You have to remember corporate taxes make up a big portion of where my profits go. So if I don't know how I can reinvest my profits quarter to quarter, it's very hard for me to do planning going into next year, which means that hiring, I'm going to freeze hiring because I don't know how many people I'm going to need or not need. I don't know how many people I can afford. I don't know what it's going to cost me to employ each one of those people. So across the board, you are going to see a real constriction of the economy. And I'm not trying to do this to get people all scared or worried or anything else. I don't believe that the worst case scenario is going to happen and the U.S. economy is going to go into a deep, dark depression. But at the same time, I do think that we're going to trail. And right now, we have been teetering on a recession for a long time. We are not very far off of one, and this could push us over into a recession, even if it's just a short-term one. Part of the other problem is the risk takers in the economy who got paid by starting a company. You get paid, and some of your pay can happen in equity. Those people are going to see the taxes double on that equity going into next year. So if their company sold this year, it was 15%. Next year, it's close to 30%.
And I think that's a very important point. I think that's one that often gets a lot of very bad attention because people don't understand what capital gains really is.
Right. Capital gains isn't just the guy on Wall Street making investments. Although, you know what? Those guys are risking money, too, in order to give companies capital to use to invest. I mean, that's when companies issue stock, that's ways for them to raise capital. And they use that capital to invest in growing the company. And that means employing people, buying equipment, spending money on marketing, getting more customers. I mean, that money is used for that. So the people putting the money in are taking a risk that, that investment will pay off. And that risk should be rewarded because those people are really putting, for every dollar they invest, they're really creating $3, I think is the current estimate. On the other hand, by the way, for every government dollar that's spent, they lose 80 cents. So that's just to give you an idea of how it works. Private equity funding or private funding is always much more profitable to the overall economy. But the idea is capital gains impacts every entrepreneur, everyone who starts a company, every employee whose employees number 1 through 100, and even beyond that. Companies like Compaq or HP and IBM and Dell and GE, they pay some of their employees their bonuses in stock options. Well, if you keep those stock options and work at the company for a few years and your stock options vest and you want to cash them in, it used to be, or this past year, you would have paid 15% in taxes on the profit, and next year you're going to pay double that. It's taking away the incentive to make some of those risks and take those risks. Something you're familiar with, Aaron, or you've thought about, I know because of a family business, estate taxes. I'll let you tell your story in a second, but estate taxes, you know who those hit the worst? Farmers. People who own family farms, which there really aren't that many of anymore, and small businesses like Aaron's. But farmers are hit particularly hard because their whole basis is in the land. And what happens is when they pass that on, this past year, the taxes didn't even kick in until you passed $5 million to your heirs. And then it was taxed, I don't remember the exact rate, but I think it was taxed somewhere in the 30s. Starting in 2013, assuming they don't fix anything. And by the time you hear the show, you may have a better idea of what they have and haven't fixed. But assuming they don't fix anything, the estate tax will kick in at $1 million, and it may be lower than that. I could be wrong on this, but I think it's $1 million, and the tax rate jumps into the 40 percentile range. So if you inherited a $2 million farm, and the farm is valued at $2 million or $2.5 million or $3 million, and you don't have, let's say $3 million, and you don't have $1.5 million or let's say $1.25 million to pay the taxes on it, you have to sell your farm. And that's a shame.
And that actually does speak directly to my family's business, because I know and just exactly on what you're talking about with property. The property that our business sits on we bought it for very cheap. It was in a very depressed area, financially, value-wise, very depressed area of town, and we bought it because we needed a very large space. And because it was an extremely good price, and it was very centrally located, oddly enough. And we're in a very, very, very niche industry, so we actually can draw people to wherever we are within reason. But since then, the area has just gone through a huge boom, and now I believe the property is in. I'm pretty sure it's over the 5 million mark. It may be just shy of the 10 million mark. And on paper, it's like, oh my God, wow, that's so much money. And it is a lot of money if I had it sitting in cash or in gold or something, tangible in front of me. But when you talk about having that money tied up in land, especially like the farmers or the business owners, no, you don't actually have that money. You have that money as an asset. But in a lot of ways, I guess that money, that land actually becomes a liability in the sense of what you were talking about. And I know if both of my parents passed, let me knock on a whole bunch of wood and on my head too when I say this, is that if tomorrow something happened and both of my parents passed away, there is no way my brother or I or combined or anything else, even if we sold our own personal properties, our own homes, and everything that we owned, there is no way we could pay the taxes on our estate tax for that. I mean, and that's just the business.
Yeah, you'd have to liquidate the business assets, which in turn would force you to liquidate the business, essentially.
Oh, it's not even essentially. I mean, it is. I mean, without that property, the business is gone. I mean, it's not. The business is too large and too difficult to move, and so at that point, it's done. But it's not just that. It's all of my parents' personal holdings too, their own home, everything else. I mean, it's just. You're talking, and to back up, you're talking about a business that has been around for over 60 years, and it has taken 3 generations of my family to build up to that. And so when people, and I think this is, going back to people having a fuzzy understanding of things, of when you say, yeah, this guy over here is worth $10 million, he may be worth that, but that doesn't mean he has that. It almost never means it's sitting in the bank. And so, yeah, you have these family farmers and other family business owners that have worked for many generations very hard and sacrificed a lot of things, including and especially spending time with the family that they're working so hard for, to then end up in a situation like what we're talking about here, where that can all be wiped out in the blink of an eye because of these really bizarre taxes.
Well, and the really scary part about that, and this is what people really fail to understand, and this is a great comment. I can't remember who made it, but it is somebody famous. But it's basically that money goes where it's welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, and you actually saw, for those of you who haven't paid attention to France, I know they're not a country most of us pay attention to. France passed a 70% millionaires tax recently, so every dollar over $1 million is taxed at 70%. And they actually lost a lot of people. A lot of people who had that kind of money left the country. Because when you have that kind of money, you can just leave the country. You become very mobile. And that's where the term, money goes where it's welcome comes from. Even the French Supreme Court, their version of the Supreme Court, just ruled that tax was unconstitutional. Now, I don't know the details of why. It had something to do with the fact that it unfairly targeted specific groups of people. Go figure.
Oh, really?
But that's essentially what's happening here. I mean, money will eventually just go where it's welcome. And whether we find out that it's legal or not long term, and, in this country, it probably is legal. Taxes have been that high before. They've actually been up in the 90 percentile range before. The funny thing is, the real wealth will leave. And that will hurt the country more than the taxes themselves. And that's where you lose the risk takers, you lose the job creators, you lose the business leaders, you lose intelligence. It goes to where it's welcome. And that's the really scary thing for the economy when I look at the outlook. It's not the depression concept. It's not a recession. It's not interest rates. It's not inflation. It's if we really lost all that talent and wealth, what happens next?
Yeah, what happens is we slip into kind of, I want to say obscurity, but we definitely do not retain the role that we've enjoyed for the last 100 years, much in the same way what happened to Britain.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. And I think that to me is the scariest part, because I'm in it. I mean, just speaking personally, my job is a risk job. I work at a startup. I plan to do, when this startup does something, I plan to move to the next one. So these things really impact me directly. And I look at it and say, how does this impact my job choices going forward? And where will those be? Are they going to be here, or will they be in countries like, where Brazil right now is doing huge things around entrepreneurial work and venture capital investment. South America in general is doing a lot of work around that. You've got countries, oddly, in Eastern Europe, who would have thought, doing a lot of work around growth in investment and entrepreneurial work. So it becomes very interesting to people who have these types of jobs. And I know, Aaron, you're very interested too because of the capital gains or the estate tax aspects.
I'm also in a position much like you are, where I'm in, since the company that I worked for just formed a new company and then promoted me, and it's a convoluted story of how that all worked out. But I am actually in a position where that I work for a risk taker. I work for somebody who's taking big risks right now and sinking their own personal money into something to start up a company that, if things go sideways enough, that dries up and goes away.
Yep, exactly. And at the end of the day, I mean, the comment sounds very callous, or I don't know if it's callous, but it sounds like money's evil. It just leaves. Well, money doesn't have emotion. I mean, money goes where it's welcome is really the comment of, at the end of the day, people make rational decisions to retain the wealth that they usually work hard for. This concept of this guy sitting in a wood-paneled office who never worked a day in his life and comes from lots of money, there are not a lot of those people. There's very, very few of those people.
I've actually never met that person, because I did. I grew up, and I know you did too, with some people that just inherited a lot of money. And here is the funny thing about those people. I know lots of movies like to make out the idiot son who inherits all this money, and things just kind of, that doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a guy out there like that.
Yeah, he's the exception to the rule, though. And what I grew up with was, I watched a lot of people who really inherited a lot of money. I mean, money, you would think, how can you possibly spend that much money in one generation? And you would watch these people get their trust funds and blow it in like under 5 years.
Yeah.
And so really the people that have that money and the people that retain that money are the people that actually do work extremely hard, or were intelligent enough to give the money to somebody else and say, you're in charge of it, you figure it out, you make me money, I'm going to go sail around in the Greek Isles or something in a sailboat.
Well, and then what people fail to remember is the way they invest. When those people make investments, that is risk taking with your money, and that's growing other businesses and allowing other people to employ people. So money does make money, believe it or not, and not just for the original holder. But at the end of the day, those people make rational decisions, and they have to make decisions to protect the wealth they work hard for. And they will go where they are welcome. There's a lot of people who are very proud to be French, and they are no longer living in France. And there are a lot of other countries more than happy to take them in.
Yeah, and I think that's the funny thing about money is when these countries and when these societies start to spring up that become, and this really is what it is jealous of money and really take action against that and make the people that are the innovators and stuff out to be the real bad guys, or make them out to be evil. You
Right.
find that a lot of other countries are very more than happy to raise their hand and say, we'll be good to you. We'll treat you well. Please bring your money here because you know what? We need some, and we're aware that money has babies.
Yes, exactly. Money begets more money.
Yes. So I think, to wrap up, and it looks like this is going to be another one of those hour-and-a-half long shows. I guess maybe that's a new trend for the rabbit hole going into 2013. We'll see what happens with that. But I think to wrap up, to kind of recover things, as far as liberty goes, I don't know. I don't think 2013 is going to be a great year for liberty. I mean, I think we've already started off with seeing something that, especially with the Patriot Act, which, God, that name just makes my skin crawl, because there's nothing patriotic about that act. Quite the opposite, I would say. So I don't know. What's your take, Jonathan? I don't have a real strong good feeling. I don't even have a lukewarm good feeling about our liberty going into 2013.
Yeah, my take on the 2013 is this is kind of the dark ages for U.S. liberty. We're entering a real bad stretch, and it's going to take some very brave politicians and brave liberty-loving Americans to support them. move forward and really make this happen. When I say brave, I'm not talking about a revolution. I'm not talking about anything crazy here. I'm talking about using the political system that we have at hand and really making some changes and being a little bit more vocal about wanting liberty and talking about it again like that, not like it's a dirty word. I think a lot of people think liberal and liberty, and that's not the case at all.
No, as I was watching a documentary recently, liberal actually was a bastardized version of the original word, but that's kind of a personal pet peeve of mine, and neither here nor there, I guess, in this moment. But and I think moving on to my take on the gun control stuff is we're going to see a lot of extremely heated, a lot of very nasty debates going forward. I do think we are going to have some pretty serious gun control laws reintroduced, and really this is an old dog and pony show that we've been here before, and we're just doing it again, even though we proved last time it didn't work. I don't think it's going to be as bad as what Dianne Feinstein is proposing. I think what tends to end up happening with a lot of these things is that they make their way through the Senate and the House, and they become very shells of their former themselves. But I still think we are going to have some stuff, and we are going to have some aggravation. We are going to have going on liberties. We're going to have our liberties trampled on, and really it's going to be ineffective. But I think we're probably going to see something very similar, maybe slightly more stringent than kind of the 1994 assault weapons ban. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think this is one where it's really going to depend on the cojones on the conservatives in Congress, which these days have been real shriveled up and tiny. This is going to be an interesting debate. The public opinion here is so strongly divided that it's going to be really interesting, and we'll see how much bullying the anti-gun folks start taking. I mean, they all claim to be big Second Amendment supporters. Obama said it recently. Bloomberg said it. Dianne Feinstein has said it. But at the end of the day, the reality is they all want to restrict an amendment, and you don't ever hear anybody talking really heavily about restricting the other amendments. So I don't know. I'm a little worried about this one. Not so much so that I'm digging up ditches in my backyard or anything and burying anything at this point. But what was that?
I said not that we'll state publicly.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just kidding.
But I am a little bit more concerned about this one because I think that the Republicans have a really hard time holding to values these days. I think the first time a Democrat calls them a child killer, they'll all vote for whatever's put in front of them. So I think we all need to stick to the stance of how do you protect the children without the guns?
And as far as the financial outlook, I guess we're going to go. Probably, I see this as going more along the lines of kind of where you and I stand on the other two issues, which is I don't see a bright future, not just for this country, but just for the globe as a whole. I don't see us digging ourselves out of this mess. In some cases, I see it being slightly worse with the potential to be a whole lot worse. But my opinion is it's going to be just more of the same. What's your outlook, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more of the same on this one, too. I would say 2013 is probably not going to be a good year for most of us. And I don't say that meaning it's going to be a bad year either. I just don't think this is going to be the year that many of us go, oh, my God, that was the best year for my finances that I have seen in my whole life. No, it's just not going to happen this year. Some will do very well this year. It always happens that way. Like you said, Aaron, there's always going to be somebody who does really well and somebody who does really poorly. I think the majority of us, though, will probably have a down year. And I think it's just going to be, again, this all goes back to, and I'm not just talking about the presidential election, just across the board in this country, elections have consequences. And when we start really understanding what that means, then I think it's going to start meaning something to people. And I think for most people, seeing that first paycheck of the new year is going to be eye-opening because most of us, and just statistically, most people get paid biweekly. And most people get paid, on the 1st and the 15th. Those are just numbers that come from the IRS. So you've either seen your first paycheck of the year already, whether you can cash it or not, or you'll be seeing it soon if it's a electronic deposit, and you will see that it's smaller than your last one. And the one after that will also be smaller than the one from last year, and so on and so forth. And it's going to total real amounts of money for most American households. And by the way, that's whether they fix the so-called fiscal cliff or not. Obamacare had some taxes in it that were kind of nasty too, another 3.8% for everybody. And people say, oh, it's just 3.8%. But, that money adds up really quickly. And that's money that you can no longer spend on something. And by the way, your health bills didn't go down. So I do just overall, my final prediction is that financially, most of us will have a down year this coming year. And I'm sorry about that for all of you and myself.
And, we didn't intend for this show to be a downer.
But I think it's just a realistic thing, right, Aaron? At the end of the day, they can't all be positive. We'll try to do some fun shows soon. We still want to do that show on the rifles we love.
The rifles and the boys who love them.
That might be the title of the show.
Yeah. But, that's one thing we've never tried to do. I mean, we always try to entertain, but we also always try to inform and never really sugarcoat things or bullshit about things, or bullshit people about things. And which is also why we're not coming on here screaming and yelling, going, oh my God, the sky is falling, and this really is the Mayan prediction or something that's Alex Jones complete bananas, crap. Which actually I meant to start off the entire show with, for the people that are emailing us the conspiracy theories about the shootings and everything else. Please stop. It's not that the same thought hasn't crossed my mind, so you are validated in that sense. But it's also just not something I'm interested in really spending my time with, and I don't really think Jonathan is either. If you can't, we can only prove an outcome. We cannot prove an intent. So it's kind of a pointless conversation, and quite frankly, hopefully we can all spend our time doing more productive things, like maybe being one of the people that do come out ahead in this next year.
Right, or being active to try to fix the future. I think that's going to be something we talk about a little bit more maybe in this coming year.
Yeah, and I think maybe we work on getting some guests that can clearly talk about becoming more politically active to really do something to change the landscape of things and maybe even change the direction that we're headed in.
Well, and I'm just going to say one thing about the conspiracy theories. I don't want to see them either, but if you have the hard-clad evidence and you'd like to bring it to us first, then we are more than welcome to take a look at it. But we need more than just, I have a theory and it goes like this. I want the documentation, the photographs, the recordings.
I would agree with that.
And then if you have all that and you want to bring it to us first, we would be happy to break the story here.
Yes, of course. Well, not happy, but we would be happy to break.
Yes, that would be good. We would enjoy breaking the story here first, and then help you drive that story to the bigger media outlets.
Exactly. So, but I think to wrap up on a positive note, that there is, and the positive note is that the world is not coming to an end. Whether you like Obama or don't like Obama or like the politics, like what's going on or not, the positive aspect is that there's always something that can be done to push things forward in a productive manner. But sometimes it just takes those of us that would just as soon spend our time working on our own lives and not being busy with other people's lives. Some of us, it's just going to take really getting up off the couch and being more active. And like you were saying a minute ago, Jonathan, much more vocal than I think most people in our kind of circles here inside this thing we call the rabbit hole, really getting off the couch and being a lot more vocal and a lot more involved and giving up a lot more of our time towards those things than we'd like to do. And with that, we wrap up episode 94. Happy New Year. Help us bring you better information about preparedness. If you have an author, blogger, podcaster, video blogger, or any other person you'd like to hear on the show, we'd love to have them on. Contact the person you'd like to hear on the show and tell them about In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast. Tell them to visit intherabbithole.com/guest. Don't wait. Do it today, and let's grow the show together. Are you part of the solution? Spread the word about preparedness by reviewing In the Rabbit Hole on iTunes. It doesn't just let us know how we're doing, it also tells others the show is worth listening to. Review us today on iTunes. from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.